Hello and welcome everybody to this afternoon's conversation with me, Ira Mukherjee, and my author today, Moin Mir. Moin is the author of two books. His first book was a work of nonfiction, Surat, Fall of a Pot, Rise of a Prince. This, his second work, The Lost Fragrance of Infinity, is a work of fiction. And before we get on to a conversation with Moin, I wanted to set the book in time and in context for all our readers and listeners who may not have as yet picked up a copy of Moin's book. So Moin sets this book in a very interesting point of time for anybody who has been vaguely related to Delhi, because this is around 1738, if I'm correct. And this is the beginning of the end of the Mughal Empire. This is the reign of Muhammad Shah Rangila, the genteel rule of this Mughal Pasha who was very interested in philosophy and culture. But these are the very last years where all this can exist in peace and harmony, because about to enter into the scene in a catastrophic manner is Nadir Shah, the plunderer. And after that, all goes to hell in the great city of Shahjahanabad. And this is the beginning of the end of the Mughal Empire and of Delhi. So Moin sets the action in the city of Shahjahanabad with his character Karar Ali, who is a craftsperson. He is a maker, or rather renovator of tiles, and he is caught up in the middle of all this catastrophe and this action. And he is in love. In the beginning of the book, we see him in love, deeply in love with this woman called Abira. But he has to leave the city. He has to begin a journey of exile. And he moves away from Delhi into Central Asia, into the Ottoman lands, and then into southern Spain. And this is a journey that is both physical and metaphorical, as he's somebody who is very interested in Sufi thought. But this journey helps him to deepen his understanding of what it means to be a Sufi, what it means to love somebody, what is loss, what is grief, what is compassion. And through his journey of understanding, we are also brought to experience some of the different ideas of Sufism. And so Moin uses these techniques in what I would say is a very accessible manner to understand some of the pretty profound learnings that we have in Sufism. So Moin, to begin with, just tell us a little bit of how you thought that you would handle this subject, why you chose fiction. Was it very specifically to appeal to a broader audience and to bring them into this ambit of Sufism, or did you have some other thought to it? And just explain the journey a little bit.
Thank you, Ira. And I want to specifically thank you, Ira, for taking the time and speaking with me about my book when you have a masterpiece yourself, which has come out recently. And, everyone is eagerly awaiting that. So I thank you for taking out the time to speak to me. And I thank Crosswords and Rolly for knitting this conversation together. Thank you so much. To answer your question, yes, the reason that I wrote this book, in terms of a fiction book, was because I very quickly realized that a purely academic piece of work on Sufism, for lack of better expression, would be dry and would be confined to scholarly archives. And while there is an enormous amount of adulation and admiration that I have for academics who've tried to pursue it in this fashion, after much reading and traveling, I realized that the only way to show the effulgence of the Sufi mind and the beauty of Sufism is through a human story. And because it captures emotion, it captures love, loss, and a sense of reaffirmation in faith through philosophies. And it's through the extraction and extrapolations of those Sufi philosophies which I thought I could inject into a character's journey, which would be able to then be relatable to many people. And so that's the reason why I wrote it as a novel. And the main thing that struck me is that there were um, three giants of Sufism, and at the core of their belief and from where their philosophy sprung was love. It was the unimpeachable truth that Ibn Arabi was madly in love with a woman called Nizam. It is the unimpeachable truth that Hafiz was madly in love with a woman called Shaki Nabat. And the love and the respect that Rumi and Tabriz shared triggered the whole belief of creation because of love. And I could not write that in an academic way. So that's how.
Yes, that makes a lot of sense. And, if I can just pin you down a little bit on this question of love and how, in a way, the Sufi, thought has almost become a victim of its own popularity, in recent times. Um, to the general layperson, when you think Sufi, you think Durga, you think Kawali, you think, whirling dervishes if you are out here in the West. And, this aspect of Sufism, which only tells you about direct communion with love and how love is all you need, has almost been taken out of context, even taken away from its, let us say, its Islamic setting, whereas actually it is very much part of the lived, Islamic way of the Muslim way. If you look at the incredible popularity, you were talking of some great thinkers, but Rumi, how he has been almost cleaved from his Muslim origins and taken and translated in a manner in which almost all Islamic references are removed to make it palatable, let us say, to a Western audience. So how do you sort of, how are you able to transcend that, and how important is it to let us realize that this is very much an acceptable form of Islamic thought. Sufism isn't something which is not recognized or is considered offensive by most people. How do you handle that aspect of it?
Well, I think this is a wonderful question, Ira. It is vital to understand that Sufism is Islam. It is an integral part of Islam. It's mystical thought, but it is rooted in Islamic in Islamic philosophy and in the philosophy of Islam. And you cannot divorce the two. I think it's absolutely ridiculous when people try and deviate from that. Rumi was a practicing Muslim. That is why he is called Maulana Rumi.
Right. Right.
All of these wonderful men, Ibn Arabi, Rumi, Hazrat Nizamuddin Aulia, they were practicing Muslims. And the only thing was, is that they were deep thinkers. They were philosophers. Ibn Arabi looked at Islam and the concept of Wahadatul Wujud, which means the unity of being, which he actually came about with, is because he looked at Islam through the lens of metaphysics. And he looked at life through the lens of metaphysics. And that was a whole philosophy that was developed, rooted in Islamic mysticism. So you're absolutely right. It is, it is impossible to divorce the two, and one should not do that. As far as the love aspect is concerned, and I think you're absolutely right. When one thinks of Sufism today, one thinks of whirling dervishes. You go to a dargah, you go for a mannat, which is all wonderful. And to be very fair, Ira, I still do that. So, and I think it's beautiful.
I do it too.
Yeah, I still do it. I still go to Ajmer and fall on my knees. So I'm not in any way saying that it's something that should not be done. In fact, it is something that brings about humility. The only thing that I stress upon is that there is more to it. There is the philosophy that one should read. It is the concept of love of the whirling dervish. Look at it from the lens of philosophy, where his hand is up. One of his hands is upturned and the other palm is facing downwards. It's about balance. It's about the balance of life. It's about the balance of universe. It's about the balance of planets. And once again, those are the deeper meanings that one has to investigate. Once again, staying with your question about love, the concept of takhliq, for example, which is creation, it comes from love. There's a verse, some say, that Sadi had written, and some other people debate that it was by another Persian Sufi. And they say, and it's a verse which I write in my book, and it says, how do you perceive God? And the protagonist says, God said that he wanted to be known and he wanted to be loved. So he created creation. So the whole concept of takhliq or creation comes from love. Rather than just looking at a whirling dervish, as you rightly said, and going away feeling, it's a wonderful show, take a deeper dive into understanding where that comes from.
Right. And talking about Tatliq, as you were saying, for example, I believe that there are many different words in Urdu, in Persian, which mean love, whereas in English it is much more limited. Just like the Scandinavian countries have 20 odd words for snow, and we just have the one word for it, right? So it depends on your lived environment, the context in which you live. So in talking about translations, how do you, deal with this problem? I know that, when I was working on Akbar, one of the huge misconceptions that's happened was because of a mistranslation of the concept of Sulaykul, which was wrongly believed to be a new religion at that time. And people were like, oh, Akbar has founded a new religion, whereas that was absolutely not the case. It was, a translation which was wrongly interpreted. How do you cope with things like these very fine nuances of meaning of different kinds of love for the divine? Do you read? I believe you've taught yourself Persian. You've learned the language. How do you approach this very, very prickly issue of translating these very sensitive phrases?
Translation is something which is so difficult. And so when I started learning Farsi, particularly for this book, I realized that, honestly, Ira, it is virtually impossible to translate Hafiz. It is virtually impossible to translate Rumi. The words in English, they're just not there. And so I realized that it is the meaning that I should go after, rather than the literal translation. So, the verses that I chose for my book as a medium of expression in terms of reflecting a particular phase that the protagonist is going through, I had to choose verses that meant something for that particular passage of the book. And the translation bit is something that I just relied on scholars of the past. For example, supposedly the finest scholars are Arbery, Nicholson. These are gentlemen, who translated these works and got accepted in Oxford and Cambridge. And so those were the works that I relied on translation. But in terms of putting the verses in, I decided to put those verses in a space in the book where the meaning could be understood in conjunction with what the protagonist is going through. So to crisply answer your question, translation was very difficult. It was more about understanding the meaning and put it in the context of the protagonist's life, and then using that in the appropriate times in the novel.
Right. That makes sense.
I hope I'm making sense.
No, that makes a lot of sense, especially the way you started off by saying that it's the essence of the thought that you're trying to convey, not necessarily a literal translation word for word. That makes a lot of sense. And if we've spoken about the love on the one hand, there's another sort of contrasting part to Sufism, which is reason. You just touched upon it early on, like the writings of Ibn Arabi and others, how there was a huge focus on aql or reason, and something which we don't often think about when we think about Sufism is that a lot of thought is put into it. Reason is very greatly valued, and I remember again I am obsessively coming back to Akbar, but he had this side to him too, where he would put everything to the test of reason. You may come to him with a great reputation, like Hakim Gilani did as a physician, but he put him to the test and made him, test out various samples to see whether he could catch this man out in a falsehood. So tell us a little bit, about the role of akal or reason in the system.
The role of akal and reason is of paramount importance. What the Sufis do not digress from is one thing, which is under the overarching umbrella of your quest for the divine and your love for the divine, which is the overarching umbrella, lies reason, logic, even mathematics, science, all of that. Now, it's a very complicated philosophy to understand, and the one who does this repeatedly, and a lot of Sufis after him do it as well, is Ibn Arabi. And I had the good fortune to read Ibn Arabi in the Koç University in Istanbul, and then again in Andalusia, Spain. And it takes a lot of reading, rereading, and rereading to even try to come to some space where one can understand him. But yes, reason is absolutely vital. Now, taking a leaf from Ibn Arabi's page were a galaxy of Sufi philosophers who took reason to the next level. Ibn Tufayl, he wrote Hay ibn Yaqzan, which was the first philosophical novel. And from seeking inspiration from that, Robinson Crusoe came into play. So Hay ibn Yaqzan is a young boy who's marooned on an island. And bear in mind, this is a novel written sometime in, if I'm not mistaken, in the 10th century. And it is only through reason and aql that he understands his relationship with plants, with animals, with nature, even with rocks, and he reaches a sense of belief that it is my position as in this particular space, in this island, which oddly enough which happens to be his universe, and how do I through rationale understand my existence? So reason becomes vital in Ibn Tufail's work. He looks at rain falling, and then suddenly it evaporates, and he starts questioning, how does that happen? How come rain fell just 2 days ago, and then just in 48 hours, in 2 days, there's nothing there under the sun. It's been so hot that it's evaporated. But these are rational reasoning thoughts that are coming in his mind. After Ibn Tufail, we have probably the greatest rationalist, Ibn Sina. And there was great debate whether Ibn Sina was a Sufi or not. But when I was researching his life, I happened to read, I actually specifically read a book called Ibn Sina, Avicenna and the Aristotelian Left, which was written by Ernst Bloch. And he proves that Ibn Sina was mystically inclined and deeply Sufi at heart. And Ibn Sina's concept of reason was something that even went past Aristotle. I'm going to just cut this very short, but he goes deeper into the concept of existence and differentiates between existence and essence. So, for example, H2O makes water, but if H2O do not come together, water doesn't exist. So while essence exists somewhere, existence doesn't necessarily happen until they come together. So these are fine thoughts, once again, deeply rooted in reason, but not divorcing themselves from faith. Once again, under the overarching umbrella of faith and spirituality, they drop reason, which is wonderful.
Yes, and quite extraordinary, because today we tend to think of these as two very divergent ways of thinking. You are either religious or you're scientific. You cannot be both at the same time. Somehow today we are given an either-or choice. It doesn't seem possible, to have the two together. And yet your central, reasoning through your book seems to be that is just part of the spiritual progress. Being a thinking human being, a reasoning and a logical human being actually comes from having this questioning attitude, this seeking attitude. Again, something I saw in Akbar's time. He questioned everything, and he found nothing wrong in that. And at the same time, he was a religious man, spiritual man. Somehow today we have lost that connectivity, and we tend to think of it as black and white.
We do, and the problem there lies that the works of the Sufis, for lack of better expression, are lost era. Coming back to the same how we began the conversation, it is beginning to become not beginning. It has become conversation of a kawali over biryani. It's become that. How many people have taken, how many people have taken the time to read Ibn Sina or
Yeah.
Ibn Tufel? And it's only when we and my one of the reasons why I wrote this book, Ira, was Sufism has a beautiful, beautiful acceptance. As we saw, Qawwali, poetry, dancing, it's beautiful. But we need to lift the curiosity for Sufi literature. That is still yet not done. And
Right.
I'm hoping that through my novel, through a human story of my novel, people are more curious to read more about Sufi philosophy.
Right. We've got a question that's popped up on Facebook where somebody has asked, why do you think Rumi got the references to go as far as the West, I think? And can you talk about the marriage between mathematics, science, spirituality, and art in Sufism?
Sorry, I didn't understand the question about Rumi. Where did he get
Yeah,
the?
I think that there's maybe a word dropped there. Why do you think Rumi got the references to go as far as West? I'm not sure what exactly that question is about,
Yeah,
but
I
we can
don't know.
talk about the marriage between mathematics, science, spirituality, and art in Sufism.
Yes, and so Ira, the Sufi mind was a curious mind.
Mm-hmm.
It was not going to be chained, and it was not going to be confined to rules and regulations. It
Yeah.
viewed Islam as a philosophy. They were deeply rooted in Islam. They were Muslims, but they viewed Islam as a philosophy and how to better yourself. And as a result of that, they became curious. They became imaginative. And when you become curious and imaginative, you start knocking on doors of all kinds of knowledge, science, art, math, all of that. And
Mm-hmm.
uh, uh, all of them, as I said earlier, again, under the overarching umbrella of spirituality and the quest for divine, they drop mathematics, logic, rationale, philosophy, science. And the champions of or bringing all of this together, or the one champion that I like to believe was Omar Khayyam. Now, Omar Khayyam was not necessarily a practicing Sufi, but deeply influenced by Sufism. I mean, he writes unequivocally about how Sufism has influenced his mind. And the marriage that Omar Khayyam brought about between geometry, understanding, innovating the modern day cubic equations. He was the first to, and by the way, deeply inspired by Hindu mathematicians, including Al-Khwarizmi, deeply inspired by Brahmagupta. But just going ahead, going more, like Ibn Sina went further than Aristotle. So did Omar Khayyam. He went further. He invented cubic equations. And he basically comes up with this concept of the orderly logic of mathematics lies in spiritual quest. Now, once again, very difficult to understand, and uh, the order of numbers is under the banner of spirituality. From there, after Omar Khayyam, you have this once again a constellation of mathematics and scientists Sufis who come to the fore. One of them is Buzjani, and he writes a book specifically for craftsmen based on geometry. And from there, you really see geometry being used in tile work. You see it being used in we today call it jali work, for lack of better expression. It was called gire sazi, which was bringing
Yeah.
it was bringing geometry shapes together. So that is how it all kind of starts.
And then this is extraordinary. So many important thinkers that we have completely forgotten about really today. But then that points to the role of debate also in Sufism, and thinkers like Ghazali. Can you tell us more about this whole idea of inspired intuition vis-a-vis faith and how that can work together?
Once again, we have a situation which gives you a dazzling heart and a dazzling mind because of curiosity and imagination. And Ghazali, was one of the intellectual giants of his time. He taught in Isfahan, and he started believing in all that Ibn Sina and Ibn Tufail and all of these incredible scholars were saying. But somewhere down the line, he writes a book called The Incoherence of Philosophers. And he is scathing of Ibn Sina and the lot in terms of rationale. And he says above rationale is inspired intuition. And inspired intuition is when you believe in the calling of your heart and faith. And he takes a deeper dive into how faith and the intuition that is inspired from faith can serve you better in the longer term of your life, because he goes down the route of the heart, and he says if you become a better human being and if you polish your heart through faith and good deeds and it's inspired through intuition, you will eventually become a polished soul. Now, once again, deeply spiritual, but he went against, he swam against the current, and he wrote a book that criticized Ibn Sina. Having said that, there was mutual respect for each other. Not that they were all living in equal in the same passage of time, but there was respect for debate. There was respect for each other. But Sufis have also, the contradiction is that Sufis have also lost their head to the clerics and to sultans and badshahs, because they were so imaginative.
Correct. Well, how about we come to your hero, Karar Ali, and his he is a maker of a restorer of tiles, actually. So tell us a little bit about how you used his work to bring out certain aspects, because architecture in Islam also has a divine function. You have the jalis, you have the symmetry, you have the charbagh design. All these shapes have an importance, a meaning in themselves. It can be a divine act to create architecture. So tell us a little bit about Karar Ali, what he does and how his work evolves through the book.
Karar Ali is a thinker. He's someone who's deeply influenced by Sufism. He's not a practicing Sufi, but he's deeply influenced by the works of the Sufis. And, he carries in himself this desire to marry mathematics and art. And it is, it is his love for a woman called Abira, for whom he wants to create a pavilion. And he's unable to do that until and unless he is taken under the guidance of a murshid who happens to be a Sufi from Isfahan, and he guides Karar Ali and teaches him this incredible art form of geometric tile making, which is deeply entrenched in understanding trigonometry, geometry, and artistry. And so once he's able to master this art form, he creates a pavilion for the woman that he loves as an expression of love. And he calls that pavilion Husn-e-Jahan, which basically is the beauty of the universe, as if to tell her that this is a metaphor for our infinite quest. But the deeper meaning that the Sufi master teaches Karar Ali is that these geometric tiles are representative of the diversity of mankind interlocking in beauty. So you have a pentagon, a triangle, a square, a hexagon, all of them knitting together and interlocking together and coming together towards a star. And when you repeat that design, it becomes quite mesmerizing, and it becomes the design of the infinite. So it is a representation of mankind if they come together through diversity and interlock with a common objective of bettering themselves and bettering mankind, you will reach enlightenment. And so that's how Karar Ali starts off, making these tiles. and understanding the love for his woman, his lady, as the love for God, because he sees the attributes of the divine in her, and then compounded with the guidance of the Sufi, he's able to see the beauty of geometry and art marrying together in gire tiles.
That's lovely. And I like the way you've used these very specific, crafts and things that we see all around us. In Humayun's tomb, we can see the star shape everywhere in Mughal buildings. It's really nice how you bring that in and connect it. And I liked one passage where you have a calligrapher speaking, I think, to Karar Ali, and he uses his own language to sort of answer a question of his. And he says, the Sufis applied an esoteric, mystical, and inward meaning to the verses of the Quran, which related to renunciation, satisfaction, hope, and poverty. For them, it wasn't a rule book to be imposed on others. It was about undertaking a journey within oneself, their main aim being to rid their lives of hypocrisy. I found that very, very moving and very, easy to understand in a way. So, can you tell us a little bit about, this hypocrisy that we must all get rid of in our lives?
Yeah, Karar is he's a thinking craftsman, and he's obviously lost. Well, I say obviously, hoping that people would have read my book, but he's lost all that he's had to violence and to complete to the ravagery of a plunderer called Nadir Shah. And yet, deep within him, he is continuously striving to find the meaning of his existence. And the one thing that the Sufis always spoke about was the quality of hypocrisy. The quality of hypocrisy that is in all of us, is there in all of us, is the one quality that we need to expunge, and we need to better ourselves. And the act of saying something and doing something else, or the act of aspiring for power, and for that being hypocritical, is something that the Sufis denounced. And they wanted people to polish their hearts and rise above that awful quality, because through that, a journey begins of bettering yourself. And so, that particular passage where he engages with a Sufi calligrapher in Bursa. At Rumi's mausoleum in Konya. Sorry, just thinking about my book. Is a moment of enlightenment in many ways for him, and it's about going within. Stop looking outwards for betterment of your life. Look within, and the first thing you do when you go within is to try and expunge hypocrisy.
And another very, important trait I think that you, bring out in the book is compassion. We have Karar Ali meeting a lot of different people, like a very violent slave trader, a prostitute, an Ottoman princess who's never known love. And all these people, he develops this feeling of compassion, of empathy, which seems to be a very important part of his journey as a Sufi seeker. Do you have a passage from your book that you could read to us about this, about compassion and its role, the role that it has to play, that we could perhaps listen to?
Yes, and I'll do that. But if you give me a minute, just a second, Ira, I'd like to. That became a very important part as I was writing the book and the characters were evolving, because I wanted people to when they were going along this journey with Karar, I wanted them to see how the diversity of mankind is reflected in the Sufi gire tile, geometric tile of different shapes and different varieties. And when the goodness in you comes together, by you, I mean mankind, you can achieve great things. And so you're right, he meets a prostitute, he meets a slave trader, he meets a princess, and all of them are basically just human beings, trying to find their way in life. And it is through the goodness of your soul, and it is through the small acts of doing good that you reach a sense of um, understanding what your space is in this world. So I'll read that passage out, and I was also hoping that through these relatable characters, uh, Sufism is better understood rather than
Right.
giving a lecture on what it is to be doing khidmat-e-khalq, which is the selfless service to mankind. So I'll just read
Right.
this.
Yes.
So this is the time in his life when he's in Istanbul, and he lands up meeting a whole bunch of people. Two of them are acrobats, Izzat and Hikmat, and they've had the most turbulent life. They've been scoffed at and mocked at all their lives for being descendants of a general who had fled. So I'll read this passage out. It had been a life of misery for Izzat and Hikmat. Everywhere they went with their animal tricks in Istanbul, they were ridiculed, and a few coins thrown at them if someone felt pity. At times they did acrobats, but that didn't stop the ridicule and didn't increase the coinage. Izzat and Hikmat were stout. Although young, both had receding silver hairlines because of the hardships life had flung at them. But that night, when the two young men performed their tricks, the gathering didn't mock. In fact, they applauded. The coins received weren't flung at them, but instead given in their palms. They pressed it against their chests in a show of gratitude. Come and see us at our lodgings whenever you wish, or even drop by the Sultan Ahmed Library where I work, said Karar. Hoja, we are honored. We don't remember anyone speaking kindly to us, said Izzat. Don't worry about all that. Spend time with us. Karar felt deep compassion for them. For the next few months, Karar changed focus. Instead of pursuing plans for the pavilion with the supreme architect, he spent time with the two sons of Holar Pasha. With their association with the troop in the inner circle of the Sultan, the taunting in Istanbul reduced for the two youths. Such was the spirit of Rumi's kindness that descended on all of them, that on a clear day they went into the forest and released the animals, and the youths decided to focus on their basic acrobatic skills. Karar made a few little toys in the kilns, and the troop went all around Istanbul performing and showcasing their crafts with great success. Seeing this growing success, even Saad, the Mudejar who had joined them, the Moor drummer, added a new dimension with paintings and his drumming skills. Bashinde-e-Dunya, which meant citizens of the world, was now a truly multicultural group. Looking at them, Karar thought, like a Sufi Gire pattern, our diversity interlocks us in beauty.
That's a beautiful passage, Moin. And I remember when I was reading the book, I was really moved by these animals set free, and it's such a, it's something that, is so immediate, is something that, an act that you can perform, which is an act of compassion for not just another human being, but any living creature, really, So that's a beautiful passage.
Thank you.
In your introduction, I remember you saying that really the beginning of the end for the Sufis in your mind comes to three interlocking events. The Ottomans at the gates of Vienna, the death of Shah Abbas II, and the murder of Dara Shikoh. So we can talk a little bit about that. But can you also bring in, because it's something which is very close to my heart as well, is the role of women. Jahanara Begum, Dara's sister, who was also, she called herself a Sufi princess, a Sufi seeker. She wrote a biography of the saints, of the Sufi saints. So, this also existed, this need, obviously, we know, exists in women as well. And women are specifically attracted to things like Sufism, this sort of direct, emotional connect to the divine. Can you tell us a little bit about, that sort of journey?
Yeah. So to the early part of the question, yes, by the latter half of the 17th century, you have three events that trigger the end of these incredible empires, and the cornerstone of their thought and their policies was the Sufi, the Ottomans, the Safavids, and the Mughals. They all kept the Sufis very close to their courts. And in 1683, when the Ottomans lose in Vienna, 1666, Shah Abbas II dies, and 1659, Dara Shikoh is assassinated. You see the contraction of these empires because the Sufi is alienated, and that vacuum is been replaced by plunderers, by men who are driven only by power. Not that the sultans and the badshahs and the shahs were not; they absolutely were. But at least they kept the Sufis close, which triggered scientific innovation. It triggered curiosity, poetry, art, literature, etc. And the women got immensely influenced by Sufism. You're absolutely right. Jahanara, who's the sister of Dara Shikoh, becomes a great practitioner of Sufism. In fact, she studies the teachings of Khwaja Muinuddin Chishti, of Hazrat Nizamuddin Aulia, and she is not the first woman who's a Sufi in many ways. Rabia Basri was a great Sufi who was a woman and who spoke unflinchingly about love for divine as well as the love for sciences. We also have a Sufi in Andalusia, Hamda bin Ziyad, who I quote at the latter end of my book, and she was the only child of a school teacher in Andalusia. And she got the finest education because the father believed in educating his daughter. And the daughter became one of the finest poets and philosophers and practicing Sufis of Spain. So from Hamda bin Zayed to Jahanara and to Rabia Basri, immense amount of ladies, got influenced by Sufism and practiced it. In fact, the Betakshi order in Turkey made it very clear that the women should not be wearing veils. They should be going out and socializing with men as well as getting a modern education. And as a result, the Betakshi order was one of the most progressive Sufi orders that we've had.
That's wonderful. I didn't know about the Betakshi order. Very good to hear about that. We have a few questions here that have come up. I think some of which you have actually answered. There are a lot of parallels drawn between Sufism and mysticism. Could you speak a bit more on that? We have covered it a little bit. If there's anything in addition you would like to add to that, and the Sufi Giri style and how they represents the Sufi call for integrating the diversity of mankind in the quest for enlightenment.
Should I answer that, or is that a comment? Characters in the book that resemble various geometric shapes. Yes, I mean that was the whole idea, and I was looking for a ribbon through which I could tell the story of Karar Ali through the lens of Sufism, and that ribbon was the Gire Sazi and the Gire tiles, and they represent, the academic definition of sacred geometry is about how different shapes lead to this infinite design in the quest for the infinite, which I write about. But when I was in Bursa, I met a Sufi, and they were just very poor craftsmen sitting outside the mosque making these tiles. And I spoke to them, and they were Sufis. They were Sufis practicing Sufi craftsmen. And they said, this is what it means. It means the beauty of mankind, the diversity of mankind coming together in different shapes, or different geometric shapes. And the minute I heard that, I said, this has got to be the kind of ribbon for my book, because you see it in Andalusia and you'll see it in Delhi.
That's a wonderful point. And in fact, I would like to wrap up this discussion with one last question, which is slightly personal, if I may. There's a point when, Karar says he's traveled from India to Central Asia, to Iran, to Seville, and he says, is a slight flickering of your light within me. For now, neither am I of the East nor of the West. Neither do I know what is to become of me. Now, I know that you grew up, lived and worked in India, and you traveled, west, and you did go via some of these places that we have talked about. Is this slightly autobiographical? Is this a little bit about you and how your journey has been as well?
Ira, when people write novels, some novelists are very quick to say we don't put a bit of us at all in the book. but I think, I'm not sure if it's quite true. I think they deny it, and I'm not going to deny that there is a semblance of a journey that I went through in my life, and it's not all of it, but there are parts of it which resemble a journey that I undertook philosophically as well, and traversing this fantastic world that we have, this incredible earth that we've been given to traverse and to learn and to explore and to question and be inquisitive and curious. There's I wouldn't say it's autobiographical, but it is. Yes, there are elements of my life in there, for sure.
And your grandfather was a Sufi scholar as well, wasn't he? And you are a descendant of Hazrat Modhu Chishti as well. So there is a direct link in a sense. You can't get away from it altogether.
I guess I can't. But we're all descendants of Adam, so in many ways we're all together in this.
Fair enough.
But yes, my grandfather played a pivotal role in influencing me, in giving me works of Ibn Arabi to read. And he would always say, "Moin Mia qawwali suniye, lekin aap padhiye bhi." So, listen to the wonderful music, but also read. And so he played a great role. And Hazrat Modhu Chishti is what we call Jad, which means our forebearer. And his shrine in Herat still continues to be one of the most peaceful parts of a rather ravaged part of the world.
Wonderful. Well, those are lovely thoughts to end this discussion on. And I would like to remind our listeners that The Lost Fragrance of Infinity is available at Crossword Bookstores and all good bookstores. Please pop in and buy a copy. This is a lovely, lovely story. And Moin has really weaved a magic story. Thank you so much, Moin, for this wonderful discussion and clarifying so many issues. Thank you.
Thank you, Ira, and thank you, Crosswords, and thank you to all our listeners. And please, Ira Mukhoti's great book, Draupadi, is out. So don't forget to get a copy of that.
2 in 1. Thank you, Moin.
Bye. Bye.
Bye. Bye.